Hi everyone. Today I'm back with Noel Haarburger. He's a returning champion, as many of you may have already watched our conversations, whether just with Noel or Noel and Matt. Hi, Noel.
Hi, Maggie.
I am so glad that we get to sit down again together and talk about shame today, because when I asked in one of the online gatherings, what are some of the themes people want me to cover on the channel? Shame and anger were the two things that came up a lot. So, again, I couldn't ask for a better person to talk about that. So, where would you like to start, Noel?
I was just thinking, um, just a little comment that the reason why I got interested in this topic of shame and self-criticism was guess why, right? I had intense levels of shame growing up as a teenager. In my 20s and 30s, I had a lot of shame and a lot of self-criticism, and I felt like that really is my core issue. Like a lot of my trauma was actually about interrupted attachment and
Mm-hmm.
misattunement, and the impact of that left me feeling a lot of core feelings of shame. So that it's kind of feels like it's been my lifelong journey to learn about how to unhook from my own shame and my own inner critic. And because of that, it's become a passion for me to kind of understand it, and then eventually now I run workshops on it. And yeah. So I just wanted to share that it comes from a very personal place of this topic for me.
I love
Yeah.
that. I love that. And there's nothing better when the sort of theory and knowledge about the subject comes together with the actual very personal experience of it. And I think that then we sort of connect to the subject in a very different way when someone basically had experienced it and know what it's like to actually live with shame, which is
Yeah.
massive. It's a massive issue for many people. And I also want to mention that, at least the way I see it, understanding shame, understanding the psychology behind shame, where it originates, what it is, how it works, how it manifests specifically in our lives, is not at all separate from conversations about awakening. And,
Yeah.
because sometimes, I know for the fact that in my own experience, there was a point at which I had almost like resistance to anything psychology after my
Uh-huh.
first
While you were
awakening.
really getting into the awakening
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
process
After my first awakening,
initially.
it was all just a story, no, don't you know?
Yeah.
It was it was
I
all
remember
just
you
a
talking about
story.
that in your book. Yeah.
Right. It was all just a story. There was no point of looking at this stuff. While all this stuff was obviously playing out massively through various patterns, coping mechanisms, so the shame and all that stuff was very much alive. But I also want to say that this is very typical part of the awakening process as well, to go through that particular stage. So there's a
Yeah.
certain innocence combined with arrogance.
Okay.
That
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
that is also a very typical part of this process. But
I can relate to that. Yeah.
it was actually through the awakening process, when life sort of brought me down to my knees, that I came in contact for the first time with shame, when the shame basically became conscious for the first time, and especially with the all sorts of judgment toward myself, but also others, and how this was such an important part of it was such a massive discovery. Is there any particular one definition of shame now, or is there a sort of universal definition that most people would get on board with?
Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of different definitions that are out there, and there's a lot of people that talk about shame. And one of the people that I had a period where I was when I was learning about shame, I followed the work of Brené Brown.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that her definition of shame is probably one of the most popular definitions in the field, which is the intensely painful feeling of believing that there's something wrong with you, that you're bad or flawed
Mm-hmm.
and unworthy of belonging as a result of that. So there's an aspect of there's a belief about the self that usually it correlates with I'm bad, I'm unlovable, I'm flawed, I'm unworthy. Like that's the
Mm-hmm.
core belief. And usually there's also a prediction coming from the environment, which is that I'm not going to belong. I'm going to be found out that I'm a loser or there's something wrong with me. And there's often there's also an expectation that I'm not going to belong or
Mm-hmm.
that I don't deserve to belong. And it's so painful shame that it's almost unbearable to sit with and be conscious of. So we will do almost anything to get away from it. And I can say a bit about the other thing I learned from shame is that it's a free part phenomena, which I learned from Richard Schwartz, who's the founder of IFS. And I found this so helpful. And that is shame is made up of an inner critic that attacks us. Like, you should be perfect. You should be smarter. You should be more beautiful. You should be slimmer. You should be more knowledgeable, more educated, blah, blah, blah. The critic has a whole lot of shoulds and standards and
Mm-hmm.
should nots. Um, and then the critic attacks us and it triggers a child part that goes into a core belief and feels attacked. And that's the child that, the critic attacks us. And then we collapse into this place of feeling small, frozen, shut down, belittled. We start to believe I'm not good enough. And that's the feeling of shame that goes with that. And we can talk about the phenomenology of shame at some point in our conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the critic, there's the part that's attacked by the critic, which is the inner child. And
Yep.
then there's a shame management strategy to get away from it, which
Wow.
is maybe for me, one of my strategies is to become appeasing. I'll try to be better or gooder or more perfect or more appeasing to get back to connection, to get back to belonging and love. Or I might deny the shame and think that I'm above it. So there's a lot of ways that we can defend against shame,
Mm-hmm.
which again, we can perhaps elaborate on at some point. But that's something that I also learned, that it's made up of those three parts. So maybe I just wonder, maybe before we go into the origins, we could talk about the difference between healthy shame and unhealthy shame, because that's a really interesting piece around shame theory for me too. That because most people think that shame is just, it's not a good emotion. We should try to get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some healthy aspects of shame, which I've come to call natural shame.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I can share a bit about that.
Absolutely.
That the function of natural shame is one of the functions of natural shame or healthy shame is a social function. Shame's job is to help us belong to the tribe. So its original job is to socialize, like when you think of a child, right? And they run out onto the road because they're not really aware of danger.
Mm-hmm.
Or they pull the dog's tail, or they hit their little brother.
Mm-hmm.
And the parent is going to shame the child in some kind of way, saying, you can't do that, stop. They might yell, they might scream. And the child will go into a feeling of shame around, oh shit, I've done something wrong. The connection to my caretaker now feels threatened. And that shame supports that child to actually move back into connection and learn not to kick their little brother or not to pull the cat's tail or run out onto roads. It actually is designed to help us inhibit the behaviors or impulses in ourselves that can lead to danger for ourselves and for others and for our community.
Yeah.
So it's designed to kind of like socialize us to be sensitive to our impact on others, to inhibit behaviors that are not healthy for connection. So, so it pulls us back into connection and belonging.
Yeah.
And that's the social function of healthy shame.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is an existential function, which shame's healthy job is to remind us that we are limited, that we have limitations, that we are mortal, not immortal. Um, it actually keeps us humble. Like if we have some shame, we're aware that I'm not the ruler of the universe. I don't have ultimate power to get my needs met or to control the world. Like it
Yeah.
reminds us that we are fallible, that we are limited, that we are human, that we are powerless. Um, and in fact, ironically, or no, I'll call it more paradoxically, when we can have healthy shame about that, we paradoxically become more grounded, more self-compassionate, more confident, more regulated,
Mm-hmm.
because we're coming to terms with our healthy powerlessness and our healthy limitations, and we actually have better self-esteem. So that's the kind of paradox of healthy shame.
Yeah.
It it actually keeps us grounded and kind of down to earth in that
Mm-hmm.
sense. So that's the existential part of it. It keeps us connected to our innocence, and it helps us have a realistic self-image, like that I've got magnificent parts of me, of my personality and gifts and capacities, but I've also got many limitations and foibles. And when we're really in touch with that, we're much more likely to have healthy relationships, and we
Totally.
can take responsibility for our mistakes, right? We can say, oh yeah, I fucked up and I'm sorry, I lost my temper, or I forgot to do that. We can just own that
Mm-hmm.
because we can own our shame. And then the last one that I think about is a function of shame is that it's inspirational shame. And inspirational shame helps us get back on track with how we want to show up in the world. It inspires us to learn from our mistakes. It's kind of like healthy guilt. It reminds us that we can actually grow and learn from our mistakes. So it's actually a really important emotion to embrace in its
Mm-hmm.
natural, healthy way. Like a good homeopathic dose of shame is quite healthy for us in many ways.
Yeah. 100%, which is why I said at the very beginning that the what I refer to as the darkest night in my journey, a huge part of it was what I would describe like sitting through the fire of shame, you know?
Yeah, right.
It
Mm.
was it really it was just such a humbling and
So humbling.
humiliating
Humiliating,
experience
yeah.
at the same time. And while it really sounds like a nightmare for people, you know, when they hear me talk about it, and like who would ever want to go through this sort of experience? But to me, I actually absolutely cannot imagine the awakening process in my experience without that particular bit.
Mm.
And without specifically the shame that came out of really just seeing myself in such a quote unquote bad light for the first time in ways that I haven't seen before. And it had to be
Yeah.
seen. It just had to be seen.
Mm.
And it was a sort of
Totally.
like the dismantling of this I would call it like a self-concept, my self-concept that I held, especially those parts where I saw myself as this like noble and righteous and in many ways better than, you know,
Yeah, that kind of
all,
like just some level of low grade narcissism in a way.
yeah, yeah. We can argue how low it was or how not low it was,
We can.
right? I mean, actually, it was actually incredibly illuminating from this point of view, precisely that for the first time, while blaming the narcissist with the narcissistic behaviors and so on, and feeling so noble and so different from that particular person and so righteous, all of a sudden I started seeing those very same qualities in myself, certain tendencies, behaviors, patterns.
Yeah,
It's just because they manifested differently. They were sort of very covert, but they were so subtle that I've not seen them before. But like if you take, say, manipulation, manipulative behaviors, I would blame that person for being manipulative, only to see then how I was also manipulative toward the
right.
same person, you see? So
Yeah.
it was shocking, first of all, to see
Did you
that
did you actively kind of go into asking yourself, am I manipulative too, or did it just seem to come up this
it just
kind
came
of
up. No,
this
it just
this kind of reckoning with yourself and having to face all your own demons and
it was part of there was a certain process of just dismantling of this self-concept, that was just taking place organically. And
mm,
that's why I'm saying that life shadow worked me before I learned about shadow work, properly as to what that
yeah,
even involves.
yeah,
Because it really felt like at some point, as I was sitting in this like rage and sadness and hurt and pointing fingers at that particular person, then it was other people as well, it wasn't just one. And the point of it was feeling like I was the noble one in all those scenarios. I was the righteous. I was the
yeah.
one
I
who
hear
would
you. That was
never
that was the
do,
dominant self-image.
right.
Yeah. I'm the noble one.
And then all of a sudden it really felt as though the finger pointing at those people just somehow turned toward me, just sort of organically. And one by one, I sat for like over 2 months nearly with just seeing situations from way back. I'm talking teenage years, how I used to manipulate people for attention, how I was pleasing, how I was saying nice things in order to gain something out of I mean,
Mm,
but the point is that all of it was incredibly. I was not aware, is what I'm trying to say. I was not aware that I was doing
yeah.
it.
But it's wonderful that, for want of a better word, your soul wanted you to see the truth.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that part of you that was open to the truth was willing to see what was really going on. And I think that takes a lot of courage, because in order to see the truth of our experience and our true vulnerability, our true fallibility, our true limitations, we have to be willing to dismantle our pride-based self-images that are often developed to compensate for and protect ourselves from these core shame-based beliefs that we carry right at the center of our psyche.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it takes enormous courage to turn toward shame
Yes.
and to face it. So I admire that you did that. And it sounds like there's a part of you that loves the truth for its own sake and loves seeing the truth. Is that fair to say?
I mean, I really can't take credit for that at all because it was a
Well, it
sort of
might
a
have been your true nature just
it
coming
was
through. I just want to know the
me
truth.
meaning that it was just something that was happening almost beside of me, like it was happening whether I liked it or not. So I
Yeah,
was
yeah.
basically, I truly felt like I was forced to sit through it and see the stuff. There was no possibility of turning myself back or say, maybe not, or even downplaying or excusing, or there was just, it was relentless. But I have to say, though, and I totally agree, and I think that this is such an important part of the working with shame, but also in the context of awakening process, which is you've got to want the truth way more than you want to be comfortable.
Well, that's it. Yeah.
There,
And I think sometimes that desire for the truth comes from the deepest part of us. It's not coming from the ego.
no,
It's like it's coming from the soul. There's some part of us that does want to know the truth. I think the soul
yes,
wants to know the truth. The ego doesn't. That
no,
the ego goes towards awakening, kicking and screaming.
yeah,
But the soul wants to see the truth, or
yeah,
the deepest part of us. What if we want to call that deepest part of us?
yeah.
Which is so interesting. Yeah.
Which is why I see because very often, working with shame, for example, is seen as like purely psychological sort of thing to do. Like it's just like a self-improvement project, or something like that,
It can be seen that way. Yeah.
It can be seen and it absolutely can stop that. Like it can still be just, gaining understanding of shame, and then sort of working with it consciously and then seeing certain patterns that come out of it and changing that. There's absolute value. Like, I don't know why anyone downplays this, because to me, there's awakening aside, there's such a huge value in doing just that. I can absolutely see how it can stay at the level of awakening aside. It can stay at
Yeah.
the
It can be a
level of
psychological
psychology,
process. Mm.
identity, and sort of self-improvement project, which quite honestly, and I will always say that I'd rather be in a relationship with someone who's done that and never had any kind of awakening
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
someone who had
Yeah. That's
profound
great.
awakening and never done the shadow work, never confronted those things. The difference, I think, is where the identity, basically, at some point, the identity stays intact, so to speak. So, like, it doesn't move beyond that. And also, I think very often we may conflate understanding of shame and understanding the psychology and our patterns and stuff like that with actual experience of shame. So actually, the intellectual understanding of how it works, what it is, if it just stays at the level of understanding and we never get to actually experience shame with
Yeah.
whole of our being, then that is also where I see the difference
We
between the
stay
awakening
stuck in our
process
development.
and yeah, exactly, exactly.
Mm.
So talk to me about how did you realize this was an issue, like a predominant issue that you've been dealing with from an early age? And
Mhm.
can we use that as like a segue to talking about how the shame basically functions and manifests, generally speaking?
Yeah, I think I first became aware of, I don't think I've ever been asked that question, so I have to think about it. Um, I think it probably, I didn't start realizing about my shame until I started doing therapy. Um, and that was, I did 2 years of Gestalt group therapy, was my first foray into therapy. And I walked up into that room where the therapy happened, thinking, I'm just going to do this because I want to put it on my resume because I want to get into this cool counseling course that will further my career. And I just think I didn't have any issues at all. And so I was in a narcissistic bubble, and I say narcissism is not a dirty word. I just want to make that clear. I think
Yep.
it's actually okay to have a bit of that. And there's reasons why we develop narcissistic defenses that we can be compassionate about. So I'm not wanting to say narcissism is bad, but I had a defense of narcissism in my very, very early 20s. And I went into that group with that. And seriously, within a couple of groups, that bubble was popped quite quickly. because the therapist was just slowing me down and just inquiring into what I was really feeling. And I started to realize I didn't know what I was feeling. And then I started to feel ashamed about that I didn't know what I was feeling. And the shame became pretty apparent pretty quickly, that I had a lot of shame about my history, not knowing what I felt, being really preoccupied with wanting to be liked and really scared of of being rejected. And I had a big appeasement pattern. All of that was completely unconscious until I started doing therapy. And then it eventually got clearer and clearer. Oh my God, I feel so like deep down, I'm just terrified people are going to see me as a piece of shit. And eventually one day I had this moment where I just got really in touch with that core wound of just how unlovable I felt I was, and just how scared I felt and insecure. And that realization opened up this huge kind of flood of grief. And for the first time in 10 years, I cried. I don't remember crying at all during my adolescence. I was so kind of shut down and disconnected from myself, my body, my feelings. There was a big, long period where I was very disconnected. But that grief became a doorway back into my humanity and my humility. And it was actually a profound moment. I remember the moment very clearly. And I remember in the middle of this grief and feeling of shame, this feeling of love came up. I just had this feeling of deep. It didn't feel like it came from myself. It felt like it came from another source, this deep feeling of self-compassion and love and wholeness came, that just welled up in my body. And I'd never felt anything like it before. And it was the first moment where I had this belief, wow, if I just let myself be with my feelings, something profound can happen. And I started to trust. In Gestalt, we call it the paradoxical theory of change. Like the more you try to change, the more you stay the same.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you stay with the truth of your experience, you naturally move towards wholeness. No, I didn't know that, but that was the first taste of that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in my early 20s. So it probably must have been about 23 when I had that big realization about how much shame I carried. And it just started to come up in my therapy. And I'm really grateful I started therapy early, which was actually, I mean, I went to therapy to put it on my resume, as I said. But I soon realized very quickly I needed it. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talk to me about how the shame, if there are any other ways you discover the shame manifested in your own experience, and how shame manifests in some of the ways the shame manifests in our experience without us necessarily being aware of it. Because to me, this was such a
Yeah.
massive discovery. I mean, look at you. You thought you didn't have an issue with shame. You just went to this Gestalt therapy group thing and just to learn. And I think that so many of us don't realize that we carry so much shame,
Most people don't. Yeah, I agree.
right? So
Yeah.
how for anyone who may be suspecting that's the case, or maybe who like you thinks, I don't think I have any issue with shame. What would be some manifestations of how the shame manifests
Yeah.
in our day to day, in our relationships that actually say, no, that's connect this bit, this behavior, this
Yeah.
pattern, these reactions are connected to shame?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. So I think, the core of shame, as we mentioned, that definition is the belief that I'm fundamentally flawed and bad and wrong and um, not deserving of belonging. And often at the core is this, that there's just an absence of self in that. There's often a very fragmented, what would I call it? Fragmented, undeveloped sense of self at the core of shame, because often at the core of shame is this sense of I don't matter, I don't exist, my needs don't matter, my feelings don't matter, I'm unlovable. And it's so painful. We have to develop some survival strategy to get away from it as children. And those survival strategies lead to disconnection from the self. So in order to manage shame, we have to disconnect. And so some of the symptoms of someone with a core shame wound would be symptoms of self-alienation, like depression, anxiety, addictions, eating disorders, of course, enormous self-criticism. It would probably manifest in patterns in relational struggles around setting boundaries, asking for what you want, allowing yourself to get close and be seen in a vulnerable place, reaching out, receiving support. So a lot of people with core shame wounds will struggle relationally. They'll struggle with having a sense of self and feeling a healthy sense of entitlement to set boundaries, express their needs, express their feelings. And as a result of that, people will often have mental health struggles around anxiety, depression. I think shame often perpetuates post-traumatic stress symptoms because they can't allow themselves to be with the underlying shock or the underlying terror that often accompanies trauma or feelings of powerless and helplessness.
Yeah.
A lot of people will feel ashamed about those feelings. And so that will then lead to patterns of avoidance of responsibility, perhaps sometimes compensations like needing to overwork or overdo or overachieve or be perfect at everything. I mean, that's often a manifestation of shame. Blaming others, fighting, blaming, judging, being violent, they're often manifestations of a core shame wound. What else? The list goes on and on,
Yeah.
A lot of avoidance behaviors will be patterns to cover over shame. And the more I went into the topic of shame, the more I realized that often shame is bound with many parts of ourselves. Maybe we can talk about the development of shame in a minute, but there's a term that Bradshaw, I've forgotten his first name. I've got a brain block on his first name. He wrote a book called Healing the Shame That Binds Us years ago, back in the early 90s. And he talked about this concept called shame binds. And what shame binds are is shame gets bound to feelings, needs, or qualities of the self. If those feelings, needs, and qualities of the self are not accepted, not seen, not attuned to, not welcomed into the family system, the child will learn very quickly that these parts of myself are not welcome, not acceptable, and they get bound with shame. And then instead of feeling that quality of self or that feeling, like perhaps sadness, for instance, the moment sadness starts to come up, it almost instantly gets bound to shame. And shame then takes over the person's experience. So they don't even feel their anger, their sadness, their longings for connection, their hurt. So shame in a way is a master emotion because it modifies and shapes and influences and often represses every other emotion. So it's considered a master emotion in that way. It can inhibit and get bound with every other emotion. And a lot, like for instance, people with anger issues often have a vulnerability shame bind. That vulnerability is bound with shame. So they can't get vulnerable. They can't allow themselves to feel helpless or powerless or needy or scared. And instead they go to anger to
Yeah.
to protect themselves from the shame that's bound with all that vulnerability. So I like that concept. I think is it Robert Bradshaw? I don't know. Now I'm trying to figure out his first name, but
What's the title of the
yeah,
book?
healing the shame that binds you.
Healing the shame that bind John Bradshaw.
Ah, John Bradshaw.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's another aspect of shame. But now I've forgotten what you asked me. What do you remember
Yeah,
what
me
your first
too.
question
So I suppose that what you didn't answer is the first bit, which is, have you discovered any other ways in which shame manifested in your life? Because you did mention pleasing, I think, right? Or appeasement. I don't know if we
Yeah.
mean the same thing. These are two different words or not, or anything else. If you want to, like, we don't have to go there. We
Yeah.
can just.
No. I mean, I'm very happy to talk about it personally. I think I developed a couple of compensatory strategies to not feel my shame. One
Mm-hmm.
of them was appeasing and making sure everyone liked me. So to and that meant my I didn't have very good boundaries. I was accommodating, and I had this image of myself as this really easygoing guy that just goes with the flow, who's really zen and um, equanimous. So I had a bit of a
Mm-hmm.
pride-based identity in my early 20s because I got into spirituality pretty young, but I kind of internalized spiritual knowledge and then used it to support a self-image of being this easygoing, spiritual, equanimous kind of guy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that kind of really protected me from having to set boundaries with people, ask for what I want, say no, express my needs and feelings. And because all of that was bound with shame. I felt ashamed of so many parts of myself. And I also got really hooked on thinking that knowledge made me feel important. So my other way to get self-esteem was through reading and collecting concepts and knowledge. And that gave me a temporary feeling of feeling like, oh, if I know this, I must be smart. And if I'm smart, then I'm okay. And I kind of got really enamored with intellectualizing things. And I went really upstairs above my eyebrows into my head. And that was another defense against shame. I intellectualized a lot of things. I over rationalized.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I kind of saw myself as this good guy that was there to help other people too, because I became a counselor pretty early because I felt
Mm-hmm.
a lot more comfortable focusing on other people than focusing on myself. And it's discovered later on that when attention was on me, I would get quickly overwhelmed because it would bring up shame around I'm going to be seen, and if I get seen, I'm going to be seen in my shame. So I had quite a lot of anxiety if I was the center of attention. I felt so
Wow.
much better having giving my attention to others. So that are some examples of the ways that I found a way to avoid my shame. Um, and I was really ashamed of my shame. That's what I also discovered. Like I believed it was really bad to feel shame. So that also stopped me from facing it. It's like shame about shame.
And how did that come about? When did you realize that?
Oh, it was when someone in my therapy group actually stated it, I think you're ashamed of your shame. And I had
Right.
this aha moment when someone gave me that feedback. I think it was a woman in the group. She saw right through all of my facades and she just started to kind of name some of the things she saw. And one of the things she said, which I thought was really savvy, was, I think you're ashamed of your shame. And that was very helpful for me to understand that.
It's harder and harder for me to remember what it was like as well to experience shame to the extent that I did. But I just remember when you talked about the intellectual bit, I carried so much shame around not knowing or not having an answer or not knowing a piece
Ah,
of information.
yeah, yeah, me too. Yeah,
And I didn't realize, I mean, from where I'm looking now, it almost sounds ridiculous. Like, how can you go to such a deep shame because you don't know the author of a particular book, right? Or you don't know certain historical fact or something like that. Like, it just sounds so ridiculous to me right now from where I'm
in
looking. But
retrospect, from where you are now,
in
yeah,
retrospect, but it was massive. And I suppose this was because I grew up in a family where intellect was very important.
right. So that was one of the messages you got implicitly or
Right,
explicitly in your family. Yeah,
right. And I remember that there was, I was taught about there's a canon of books that every intelligent person has to
read. Yeah,
read. And it doesn't matter, the intelligent person has a bit of knowledge on every subject. So I can sort of showcase it, in, right? I mean, and I cannot tell you how much shame I had around not knowing, like I said, particular author, a particular
yeah.
historical fact. And and immediately that meant something about me, and it meant that I'm stupid, basically.
Right. That was the implied self-judgment. Yeah, that you're
Right.
stupid. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
And coupled with my struggles to study and focus in school, it was just like another proof
Yeah,
that I
that
probably am
reinforced
stupid.
the critic's belief that you're stupid. Yeah.
Right.
Mm.
And then coupled with in primary school asking a question of my maths teacher who scolded me for asking that question and ridiculed me.
So you were humiliated. Yeah.
So it was not okay to ask question because if I asked the question, if I didn't know something, that again meant that I was stupid.
Mm.
So do not say that you don't know something. So pretend that you do. And I
So
cannot tell
that was
you,
the learning. Yeah.
you see what I mean? Or
Mm.
just the terror of the right answer in school, of having the right answer as there was just this one
Hmm.
fixed answer. And I did not realize until you started talking about, I mean, I was aware of those things before, but when you talked about this intellectual bit and shame around that and how you compensated by learning more and knowing more, and things like that. And that just brought all of it. And I just saw like one by one how that basically developed. But I think what I see a lot is like from the point of view of just moving both identity and then dismantling of the identity through the awakening process is that the reason why this is so painful to sit with and recognize these things is because there's the me at the center
Yeah.
in all of this. You know what I mean?
Right.
That it's not immediately a situation, a behavior is not a situation, a behavior. It's it immediately means something about me. There's like a instant
Exactly.
identification that happens in completely unconscious way.
Unhealthy shame is this
Hmm.
no differentiation between behavior and self.
Right.
So if your behavior is seen as problematic, then you think that you're bad, that there's
Yeah.
something wrong with you.
Yeah.
And then the implications is it's about me. It's personal. There's something wrong and bad about me if I don't have enough knowledge or I don't have the right answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. which is why,
Mm.
sitting through the dismantling of this process of self, what I call self-concept or self or whatever,
Yeah.
or maybe why this is also probably described as ego death, right? Because it's just so threatening to the self-concept to realize that I'm not as special as I thought I was, which is kind of, I probably people will think like you just contradicted yourself, because here we're talking about being inherently bad and interpreting those things as meaning something that about us, that we're inherently broken and bad. But this actually goes hand in hand with this need to be special, which is why I talk about narcissism, because I'm not talking about narcissism as disorder. I'm talking about narcissism simply as a mechanism where the me is at the center. Everything is
Yeah.
self-referential. Everything means something about me, right? So when we carry any kind of sense of specialness, which I 100% did, and that's how I discovered the narcissism in me, it was crushing to see this other side of me, to see the things that
Yeah.
I consider shameful about myself, like manipulative behaviors,
Yeah.
lies, white lies, all sorts of tactics and strategies.
What you're talking about, there's a lot to say there. Yeah.
Because there's something else that was hugely important is how it ties to judgment, the judgment and blame of other people. And I saw it was crucial point as well of seeing how actually the parts that I judged in other people and felt so righteous in the process of doing that, how I then saw those very parts in myself. So the judgment was
Mm.
actually a way to avoid,
Your own shame
deflect,
by
basically.
projecting it onto others.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Go.
There's so much you're saying in
I
there. I don't.
know.
Well, I mean, first of all, you're also we're talking about some of the shame management strategies or our reactions to
Mm-hmm.
shame, which can be to project it onto others
Yep.
and see them as the weak one, the vulnerable one, the arrogant one, the stupid one, the
Mm-hmm.
ugly one, etc., etc. That's another way that we can get rid of our shame and avoid it, is to project it. And
Yep.
then we can maintain some self pride based self image of being the smart one, the intelligent one, the beautiful one, the humble one, the rational one, the calm one, the easygoing one, the one that knows, all these pride based self images that we use to protect ourselves from the core of the shame. Um, so there's that's an aspect to be aware of, is all the ways that I might protect myself from shame. And the action tendency of shame is to hide, to self protect, and disappear. And so often the way we self protect from shame and hide it is to
Mm-hmm.
develop these masks of shame or shame defenses. And in relationships, that's often what leads to relationship dynamics. Someone gets triggered, it triggers them into their shame, like I'm not good enough, I'm not loved enough. Perhaps your partner misattunes to you or doesn't show interest in the way you need, or you don't feel special enough in your partner's eyes. That triggers it, that triggers the shame wound around I'm not good enough, I don't matter. And then to get away from the shame, we blame our partner, we judge them, we get defensive, we fight, we withdraw, we shut down and freeze. And then that triggers our partner into their shame. And then
Mm-hmm.
we meet their shame defense and it escalates. And that's a common dynamic in relationships, just looking at through the lens of shame.
Yeah.
So I wanted just to share that little piece. But the other piece you're saying is more around the origins of shame and how shame develops. And you gave a great example of how that can develop in an educational system.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people have educational shame and trauma because teachers can be sometimes really shaming and critical.
Yeah.
Um, when I went to school, I used to get the meter ruler. Like my teacher would literally pull me out in front of the whole class. I had to put my hand out, and he would go whack in front of the whole class, and it was so
Oh
humiliating.
no. Oh,
And I developed a bunch of shame defenses around that to manage that. But also shame often develops in very young periods, like developmentally when we're really young in our family of origins. Shame will often come about as a result of criticism, misattunement, a lack of co-regulation, when we don't feel seen and we don't feel loved and special, because we do, as children, we do want to feel special, right?
of course. Yes.
It's a natural biological desire
Yep.
to want to be connected and to want to feel special as a children. And when we are met with disapproval and criticism and withdrawal for whatever reason, um, when that's repeated without repair work, when there's a rupture without repair, shame will develop. A child will naturally internalize the environmental failure and conclude that I'm the failure
Yeah.
and think that there's something wrong with me, that mum doesn't or dad doesn't show interest in me or ask me how I'm feeling or hit me or yelled at me or withdrew from me or ghosted me or whatever. And the reason why, what I found really interesting in learning about shame is that there's a reason for why we shame ourselves as little kids and why we develop it, which comes back to the healthy function of shame. Shame's job is to inhibit the parts of ourselves that don't get received and supported from the environment. Because as children, attachment trumps authenticity. Like the biological need to connect and be attached is so much stronger than the biological need to be authentic as a child.
Hmm.
And so a child will internalize the environmental failure as their failure in order to keep the connection, in order to hold on to hope that I can get back into connection, and also to have a sense of control. If there's something wrong with me and it's my fault, then I can do something about it. I can be a better child. I can be a polite child. I can be a well-behaved child, um, so that I can get back to the connection I need. So
Yeah.
for a child, it's better to see myself as the unlovable child of lovable parents than a lovable child of unlovable parents or unavailable parents. Because if we really truly let ourselves see our parents' faults, for a
Hmm.
child, that feels overwhelmingly terrifying.
Wow.
So often children will split off the bad parent to hold on to the image of the good parent to keep the connection, and
Yep.
they'll blame themselves so that they can have some semblance of hope and control that they can get back to connection
It's
and
so
not feel so
heartbreaking.
alone.
No,
It
I
is
listen to this.
heartbreaking, I
It's
know.
so deeply heartbreaking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go on.
No, I appreciate it's good to pause and just take that in, because I can see that you're moved by this conversation. And it is heartbreaking when you really stop and think about the what an innocent child has to
Mm.
do to keep the attachment bond.
Yeah.
They have to give up so many parts of their authenticity
Yeah.
to feel safe and connected, and it's a tragedy, and that's what leads to so many problems later on down the track of
Right.
symptoms of self alienation.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is that it's actually self shaming is an act of self love. It's our best attempt to stay connected. It's our best attempt to feel less helpless. It's our
Mm-hmm.
best attempt to have some hope that I can get back to love if I become more appeasing or more well behaved or get better grades at school or et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera. So,
Or choose this particular career even to
right.
finally get the approval, to finally feel
Yeah,
validated or whatever, right?
that's it. So it like that's the irony of it is self-hatred, self-rejection, self-shaming is actually a strategy to get back to connection. It's not a reality. It in the sense that it's true that there's something wrong with me. We develop that belief in order to actually try to reestablish the connection that we need as children. And then
Yeah.
that survival strategy gets carried forward into our adult lives where we carry our inner critic with us that continues to attack us and blame us. But the origins of the development of shame are all about staying connected. We shame ourselves to stay connected and to be received as best as we can. So
Wow.
that actually is very helpful because it often brings in self-compassion when we can see that. Like I've had a lot of clients when they start to realize where their inner critic came from and that
Mm-hmm.
its original job was to shut down parts of themselves that weren't received by the environment or that elicited violence or abuse.
Yeah.
When they see that, it's a game-changing insight because all of a sudden the client realizes, oh my God, my inner critic was my ally back then. It was actually helping me stay safe and stay connected and to feel okay. And
Mm-hmm.
when we can see that, it can really shift our relationship with the inner critic. We
Yeah.
start to have compassion for it rather than see it as this horrible force that's out to make me feel like a piece of shit.
Yeah.
So it's so important to see at some point in our healing process is to see the adaptive wisdom of the inner critic, or we could call it the coherence of it,
Mm-hmm.
or the function of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
often, I'll just say one more thing before you respond. Often, shame is interpreted as through an individualistic lens. We think shame is about me and my lack and my flaws and my inability and my limitations. And we often don't look at shame through a relational lens, which is shame arises when we are not received and supported well enough and consistently enough in the relational field, and that there's not enough rupture and repair processes.
Mm-hmm.
So most people, when they have shame, they don't think about shame that way. They think it's my fault and I'm bad and I've got to get away from that shame somehow.
Yeah.
But if you can see it through a relational lens, you start to realize the reason I feel shame is there was something too much or too little in my environment that made me think something's wrong with me. And that's a
Yeah.
completely different way of seeing it. Shame doesn't just come from early relational wounds from our caretakers or parents. It can also come from schools, as you gave an example. And it can come from society and culture. Like we live in a culture that overemphasizes achievement and mastery and growth and perfection
Yeah.
and doing, that we learn our value is in doing and mastery and being the best at something or achieving something. So I think the whole Western psyche carries a shame wound because of the culture that we're living in,
Yeah.
and all the aspects of patriarchy and white supremacy and ableism and heteronormatism, kind of neurotypical ideology. There's a lot of things going on in our broader culture that also perpetuate shame. All the isms,
Yeah. Yeah.
homophobia
Yeah.
and
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
this. I mean, we could spend hours talking about systemic oppression and how that humiliates people that have differences that are not accepted in our culture.
Yeah.
And that's a big source of shame for many people too.
Yeah.
So they might have had good developmental histories, but the shame develops later on because of the color of their skin or the size of their body or
Mm-hmm.
their education or the class that they're in. So yeah, I'll pause there.
It's just that as usual, we're literally talking about a subject that is so vast. And I was saying to know before we started that I read through PowerPoint slides of one of his workshops on shame, and I was like, how are we going to cover this subject in this recording? Because I could see how we could literally not only take one slide and then basically talk about it for two
And a whole
hours.
hour
We
on it.
we could probably spend 2 hours on one point, on the first point on that particular slide. You
Just
know what
on
I
the
mean?
definition.
Just on the definition alone, right? There are so many strategies even within spirituality that can prevent us from looking at that shame, from looking at those patterns. And I can tell you, which is what I talked about after my first awakening, everything was just a story. After someone has just an awakening into no self, it's like, what self? What mechanism are you talking about? Like, there is no self. There's nobody here. What do you want me to look at, right? And again,
Mm,
here's lies the paradox that while all of it is true, it is also true that this mechanism basically operates. The point that I'm making is like it's so important in this process to see how even spiritual insights, profound, genuine insights or knowledge about spirituality, can actually prevent us from looking at those things.
yeah.
And one of the things that were so illuminating in terms of like just the sense of separation and how it manifests was seeing how it's the constant pushing away of the things that we don't want to see, of the things
Yeah.
that we deem uncomfortable, shameful, wrong, and so on, how it constantly perpetuates this sense of separation. So you can have all the awakenings that you want, but until
Mm,
there are any parts that are not being basically acknowledged and seen, then that sense of separation is going to continue.
perpetuate.
And
Yeah.
I can tell you that even after this profound insight into the empty nature of self, seeing that we live in this thought created reality, and all of that, for years after that, I was still operating from these wounds of insufficiency, inherent lack. And I was
Yeah.
continuing to pursue things that I thought will finally, when I achieve this or that, then I will finally feel like
We'll be okay.
am worthy of attention or praise
Mm,
or something
hmm.
like that. And how this little child in me was still working for that validation, attention, and praise
Yeah.
from my parents. And I was not aware of it at all, that this was happening.
It was still deeply in the shadow.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
still deeply in the shadow. So this is what I'm
Mm,
saying. This was happening, but it was such an important part of this process to first of all see the innocence of it all and seeing the incredible liberation in including all our parts, and
totally. Mm,
how basically if we don't, then that's when they come out in ways that are toxic that we now see in the society that we talk about and so on, which is why this topic is so massive. Seeing the innocence and the softening
mm,
toward those things is so important.
yeah. Otherwise, we will end up. I mean, the danger of spirit being on a spiritual path is we can spiritually bypass or
Yeah.
go on a bliss bypass. Peter Levine calls it a bliss bypass.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And that's just I did that for a good couple of years when I
Yeah.
got really into Vipassana. Before I did therapy, I went into this. I had an awakening experience and realized, oh, I'm not my thoughts. I think you and I talked about
Yeah.
this in our
Yeah.
first
Yeah.
chat,
Mm-hmm.
and it really gave me a lot of space from some of my neurosis
Mm-hmm.
and my psychological struggles. But I essentially bypassed it for a good period of time until I realized, like you're saying, I was actually still on a personal relational level. I still had a lot of issues that I had not resolved or worked through, even though I had this beautiful insight of I'm not my thoughts, I'm not my body, I'm not my
Yeah.
feelings. But it was a bit of a disconnected awakening. Like perhaps you could say I had a head center awakening in the sense that
Mm-hmm.
I realized I wasn't my thoughts, but my heart center had definitely not woken up, and my belly center had not woken up.
Mm-hmm.
Those parts I needed to turn towards, just like you were saying, and do the hard work of waking down and growing up to become a fully complete person.
Mm-hmm.
We have to do that work too, and it's so hard, right, to turn towards shame and to deal with our inner critic and to surrender to that deep feeling that there's something wrong with me,
Mm-hmm.
and to have the humility and the courage and the desire to see the truth and to be with that, not just intellectually understand it,
Yeah.
but to actually feel the shame and feel the fear of the shame as well. Like for me, I had a lot of anxiety about even feeling that shame because it was like so scary to acknowledge that the core of myself felt unworthy and unlovable, especially to let someone else see that.
Right.
Um, that was even more terrifying.
Talk about that. Talk about that because I think that this is a very common issue.
Yeah, I mean, for a long time, I only presented my best self to people, my happy, knowledgeable, competent, friendly, easygoing, nice, lovely person part of me to people. Because there was a deep belief that if I'm not showing that competent, those
Yeah.
pride-based parts of myself, people will reject me. If I
Yeah.
show how insecure I am, if I show how needy I am, if I show how um, ignorant I am,
Yeah.
or flawed I am, there was a deep prediction that people would reject me. And
Yeah.
so that kept driving these compensatory patterns of feeling like I had to mask all of that, really.
Mm-hmm.
And what helped really heal the shame was having repeated experiences of showing my vulnerability and discovering that I would be accepted in that place, that I would be met with empathy and kindness and forgiveness and acceptance. I had to experience that over and over again to start to update that core belief, which is if I show my limitations, I'll be rejected.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that was a big key for my healing, was starting to get more and more comfortable with my vulnerability and my limitations, and in a way, learn how to have healthy shame. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that to me is a big fundamental part of healing, is transforming unhealthy shame into healthy shame by actually making friends with just how messy and fucked up and limited I really am. But that's where the paradox came in, because
Right.
the more I can just say, yes, I'm fucked up, the more I paradoxically felt more free inside, because there was nothing to hide.
Yeah.
This less to hide,
Yeah.
and this more acceptance. My eye boundaries became bigger. There was more capacity to welcome more and more of myself into my self concept, until I didn't really need a self concept to protect myself with.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm at the end. By the way, I'm not saying I've still got work to do here. I'm still learning how
Mm-hmm.
to process and come to terms with some of my limitations still. And
Yeah.
I feel like it's probably going to be a lifelong work, and I still have parts of me that are scared of rejection and wanting to be loved and all that. Like, and I kind of more relate to those issues and themes now with acceptance and self-compassion, rather than thinking I have to fix it, that I have to fix my deficiency wound, or I have to
Yeah.
fix my shame and get rid of it and get to some ideal self that's completely free.
I think one of the greatest disservices to the awakening process, just as a theme, is this idea of an awakened person,
Right,
you know, which comes with a set of behaviors that should no longer be there, patterns
right.
that should no longer be there, you know,
Feelings that should no longer be
feelings that
there.
should no longer be there. And
Mm.
honestly, I am seeing this over and over again, how it messes with people's heads and actually doesn't support them in this turning into seeing those parts. Because like for example, instead of, shame, for example, especially if someone comes from quite maybe rigid traditional path where they've learned that being reactive is wrong, and then they have a lot of shame around, like, the moment they lose their shit, for example, or just get irritated, and then they carry so much shame around this reaction because that's
Mm.
unspiritual.
It's really easy to have shame when you're on a spiritual path
Oh my
about
god.
not being spiritual enough.
Yeah, just not being spiritual enough, whatever the hell that means, because obviously everyone will have every group, I suppose, will have their own, and not just group, I think we carry a lot of unconsciously ideas without even knowing it, that we have actually those ideas about what it means to be an
Oh yeah.
awakened slash spiritual person. You see,
Yeah, yeah,
this
they're
is
often unconscious, aren't they? Yeah.
right. So I think that people carry a lot of shame just within the spiritual slash awakening process on the basis of this, what I can only refer to as an identity of an awakened person, which is basically just another identity that comes with certain acceptable and unacceptable, right? And
Yeah.
which makes just being human unacceptable,
Yeah. Totally.
right?
I totally relate to that, what you're saying. Yeah, totally
Do,
relate.
do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, like it's really good to talk about it because I think that's one of the traps. We talked about traps a while ago, is the spiritual superego. That
Right.
any new knowledge on a spiritual level, like perhaps the knowledge of non-duality or the knowledge of of the true nature of the mind, that becomes reified and turned into a concept that then we have to live up to.
Yep.
Or maybe it's I should be more compassionate, or I should be more equanimous, or I should have a quiet mind. I've been meditating for 20 years. My mind should be quiet now.
Yeah.
Um, and that all that new spiritual knowledge just gets incorporated and co-opted by the ego into this spiritual superego. And then anything that's the opposite of those standards and shoulds becomes the source of shame.
Yeah.
And it's a really easy trap to get caught into. And for me, my example would be I should be more equanimous and calm now that I'm on a spiritual path. So if I get angry and lose my shit or have a moment of losing my temper, then oh my God, the shame is enormous. Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, and in a way, coming back to healthy shame, it's good to have a bit of healthy shame about being reactive, because then we can pause and get curious about it and own it and take responsibility for it. Like if
Mm-hmm.
we had no shame, that's dangerous too.
Mm-hmm.
If we have too
Mm-hmm.
much shame, it's dangerous. But if we have no shame, then we're at risk of becoming a psychopath. So we need this kind of sweet spot of some healthy shame, because healthy shame also helps me become aware of how I impact on others and how I might
Right.
misuse power. And it also, healthy shame guards my privacy boundaries. I'm not going to just go up and open up and share everything about myself with a whole bunch of strangers.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's that sweet spot, isn't it? Like if I do lose my temper and become insensitive to maybe my daughter, which I've lost my temper with her a few times
Mm-hmm.
over.
Mm-hmm.
the years and got really angry. Um, I did have some shame about it, but it was kind of like a like remorseful shame. Like I felt guilty about that, and I apologized and we repaired. So I'm not talking about that kind of shame. I'm talking about the shame where like I think we're both talking about is where I berate myself to the point that I start telling myself I'm a really bad person for being angry. I'm not spiritual.
Yeah.
And we start to really attack ourselves.
For me, one of the byproducts of the awakening process, you take total accountability for your behavior. You acknowledge someone's behavior. But the judgment bit where I set myself apart and feel righteous, like either berating myself or feel righteous as I judge the other person, that bit is not there, right? So I can acknowledge a behavior without blame.
Yeah, I see.
I can acknowledge the behavior without making the person wrong,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So the
yeah.
accountability is literally inherent in this
Hmm.
whole thing,
But
you
without the
know?
self-attack that
Or
you
the
can,
the blame
or
or
the
the
attack of the
judgment,
other.
right?
I sometimes think of the difference between discernment and self-judgment.
Hmm.
Discernment is when you can see the truth of something and you take responsibility for it.
Yeah,
But judgment is when you see something, you might observe something, but then you attack yourself or you attack the other for it.
yeah, yeah,
So often
yeah.
people confuse self-judgment with discernment, I think.
Possibly, yeah, possibly. But this
Mm.
was, this was such an important. This is what I'm saying, that sitting through the fire of this shame and seeing this self concept and all the parts that I didn't see before was so incredibly important, because even though it was incredibly uncomfortable. And yes, I had to absolutely experience that shame. That was the key to it, not to understand shame, but to actually allow myself to fully experience
Experience
it.
it.
It was
Yeah,
like it
I
was
agree.
burning this self concept to the ground. It was like each thing that's been seen,
Mm.
every manipulation, every lie, every tactic, every bullshit, every way I was bullshitting myself, all my performances, like the whole lot, right?
Yeah.
It had to be felt. It had to be felt without excusing, without judging it, without downplaying,
Mm.
without doing anything about it, just sitting purely with the experience, that was
Yeah.
basically coming up to the surface. And like I said, the reason why I now see in retrospect why it was so important, because that led to seeing the inherent innocence of it all. And when I see how that mechanism of that self concept or the self operates, then it naturally, organically extended on to other people,
Mm.
you know?
Beautiful.
And to me, that is the best thing about that, which is why I wonder if we can talk about judgment a little bit. And I want to read a quote that honestly I read many years ago and it stayed with me and it's in my notes forever. It's
Uh-huh.
by a guy called Tim Crader, and he said, "One reason why we rush so quickly to the vulgar satisfaction of judgment and the love to revel in our rageous outrage is that it spares us from the impotent pain of empathy and the harder, messier work of understanding."
Mm.
I mean,
That's a beautiful
I
quote.
get
Wow.
chills every time I read it because he just nailed it, He just
Mm.
nailed it.
I
Mm-hmm.
think I think often with judgment of self and judgment of other is an observation
Mm-hmm.
and then an evaluation that's
Mm-hmm.
measured against some standard about how we should be. And that links into this kind of righteous ideal self that we're trying to measure up to and identify
Right.
with.
Yeah.
Um, so that's often the definition of a self-judgment is it's we're evaluating ourselves against some standard that we think we should be, or some standard we expect of another. I think discernment is different because we can be discerning with compassion. We can Like if I do something that's hurtful to someone, I can be discerning and go, gee, that wasn't very nice. I think I got reactive there. I'm going to say sorry, or I'm going to have a repair conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no self-judgment in that. There's just ownership of, yeah, I stuffed up. I kind of became messy or reactive.
Mm-hmm.
But you can do that with us. We can do that with ourselves and with others without judgment, I believe, um, and righteousness, and without identifying with some ideal self-concept that we should be measuring up to.
Yeah.
And that, I think, part of that is I mean, a big part of that is cultivating self-compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Being compassionate towards ourselves for being human, for being messy, for being limited, for being fallible. The more we
Mm-hmm.
have compassion towards ourselves, the more we will have compassion for others when they are human and messy and make mistakes. I think it's a parallel. Like the more we tend to only judge others because we would judge ourselves the same way.
Yeah.
So, often an outer judge is just a reflection of having a big inner judge, if that makes sense.
Oh,
And the
yeah.
more that we, yeah, right. So the more that I've learned to be compassionate towards myself, naturally, I might be discerning of the other's behavior, like that wasn't cool what they did,
Mm-hmm.
but there isn't that, oh, they should have been like this,
Yeah.
or they're a bad person, or they're a stupid person, or a dumb person, or an ignorant person. Um, so I find that that's a way that I make sense of it.
I just cannot help but see um being judgmental, and what I mean by that here, because this is the bit where I think it may be slightly confusing. I'm not even making being judgmental wrong again, okay? Because that's part of our humanness as well. It's probably one of the least attractive parts of our humanness, the kind of judgmentalism that makes us feel better about ourselves, basically, when we're at it, is what I'm trying to say, right?
Yeah,
So actually, and it's almost like the outrage, the judgment that kicks in, very often, where, we don't even take a moment to look at the situation, let alone ourselves. Part of this process that I sat through with this shame and all those things was actually, it lasted for months, where whenever I even made smallest judgment, like, how could she say this? Or how could he say this? Or how could he do this? Where this question would come up with a kind of a judgment, immediately I would see in front of me like examples of me doing the very same thing. It was like, didn't you ever say something that you regretted? Did you never lose your shit? Did you ever
yeah,
say things that really you wish you didn't come out, And how easy it is to like immediately through that outrage create that sense of separation between me
yeah.
and that other person,
Mm,
and then how this self-righteousness then
right.
feeds this sense of specialness, like, I'm so noble, I'm so self-righteous, I would
Yeah,
never, and let me tell you about this person how
yeah.
they shouldn't have. Yeah, so I'm sorry that I'm like going on and on about this and in circles, but i I don't know whether I conveyed actually what is it that I'm
Well,
trying to
let me add a
say.
couple of things that I'm pinging off here, because I think you're describing a really interesting. It's a social phenomena, like the cancel culture, for
Mm-hmm.
instance.
Mm-hmm.
That if someone makes a mistake, someone that's got some social status, and they make a mistake, then, or they say something wrong, all of a sudden everyone turns on them with this absolute weaponized righteous indignation
Yeah.
that, this person is a terrible human being. And I think, as you're saying, it's very enticing to do that because we get to feel right,
Yeah.
and we get to feel support that self-image of I'm the good person, I'm the right person, they're the wrong
Absolutely.
person.
Yeah.
And that props up our self-image, it supports our self-image. And it also reminds me of this at a biological level. I remember Peter Levine, founder of SE, said that he calls it the valency effect. And what he means by that is that the more angry we are, the more we believe our thoughts. It's
Mm-hmm.
just a biological phenomena. And that really resonates for me. Like I know when
Yes.
I reflect on any time I've been angry, I'm convinced that I'm right. I'm convinced that my thoughts are accurate depictions of reality.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't even stop to think maybe there's another way to see this. Or is
Mm-hmm.
that really true, what I'm thinking? Like
Mm-hmm.
when I'm in the middle of anger and righteous indignation, I'm completely unable to investigate my thoughts. I'm just completely identified with them. And Peter Levine calls that the valency effect. So the more intense we have an emotional reaction, the more we're likely to believe our thoughts.
Yeah.
And I think that that goes with shame as well. The more intensely we feel shame, the more we believe our thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
The more intensely we feel angry, the more we believe our thoughts. And then we're very vulnerable to becoming deluded, to use
Mm-hmm.
to use that
Yeah.
term. And I say that because I know I'm very deluded, and I'm I'll be spending the rest of my life learning how to be less deluded. But
Yeah.
I think
Last time
part of
we argued with Matt, who was more deluded out
that's
of
right.
three of us. I just wanted
That's
to
right.
remind you.
I remember that. I
That
remember
was a
that
contest.
conversation. We were projecting our deludedness onto Matt.
Yes. Yeah,
And
absolutely. Yeah.
and that's the thing. I think projection is often a dynamic in these things, that we project our disowned selves that are shame bound onto others. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember an example for me. I remember a period of time where my my daughter went for a phase where I felt like she was really materialistic. She was just completely obsessed with cars and clothes and makeup, and I was thinking I could start to feel my judgment coming up and feeling kind of judgy and critical of her and go, she's so shallow and so materialistic. And I could feel kind of
Ugh.
like I felt disconnected because of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And then I just paused and I realized I'm in a reaction to her. And I just did that U-turn,
Mm-hmm.
which was I asked myself, what is it about her that's bugging me? What's bothering me? And I realized it's her focus on superficial stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then I asked myself, what's my relationship to my superficiality? And bang, I realized, oh, that's what it's about. I can't stand acknowledging my own superficiality.
Big time.
Like I like to see myself as a reflective,
Of course.
deep thinker. And another self-image that I had about myself was, some kind of deep thinking, reflective, philosophical person, um, that's only interested in the deep things in life. And I
Yeah.
disowned all my superficiality. And once I realized that, it's like the spell broke, and all of a sudden I saw my daughter in a completely different way. I just had all that reactivity left. I felt more connected to her. I didn't feel separate. And I realized, yeah, I can be really superficial, and I was able to own that in me. And I think that that's the key that you're talking about, is when we can
Yes.
step back and go, what's that? What am I judging about that person? Like maybe that person's being judgmental,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe that person's being arrogant, or maybe that person's being insensitive or ignorant. And what if I ask myself, have I ever been those qualities in myself? And how do I relate to my own ignorance, my own judgmentalism, my own arrogance? And as soon as we can recognize, yes, I can be like that, all of a sudden we are back to connection, because we realize this is part of the common humanity.
Yeah.
And I think that's what brings us back into unity and connection, is recognizing that everything we experience is human, part of being human. And can we own that?
Yeah. It's the end of pretense, It's the end of
Yeah.
performance, right? Of upholding any kind of image. And thank you so much for sharing this, because I went around and around trying to convey precisely what you just so nicely articulated. By the way, I had a lot of shame around my inability to do that and going round and round. And especially if someone would pop in the comments and say, "Oh my God, how much is she talking?" Or like,
Oh,
"What
yeah.
is she
So shame
talking
about
about?"
being verbose or going around in circles or something?
Going around not being able to articulate things so clearly and concisely as some people do, for example, or just talking too much in general. Like I had so much of that, and that would often come up in the comments as well, people saying me I talk too much, or it would be nice to hear the person
I
blah blah
see. I hear
blah, or
you.
like, or then the shame around the imperfection in my expression and how I go on
Right.
and don't know how to get to the point, and things like that. um so so thank you for bearing with me, Noel.
Oh,
But that's
it's
precisely
no problem at all.
that's precisely what I'm talking about. And very often, as soon as we mention nuance and context and trying to understand, let alone turn it around and ask ourselves, as soon as you mention those things, then that's conflated with condoning a particular behavior or making it okay, which couldn't be farther from truth. That just because you're
Yeah.
trying to understand or trying to
Doesn't
see
mean you
context
condone
or
it.
nuance, that you condone it, right? And
Yeah.
so I suppose, because we're very coming now to the end of this exploration, but I really wanted to underline how important this part is, because I think that actually paying attention to our judgmentalism, our outrage, our reactions of that kind, to anyone, whether it's our family members or our partner or anyone else, to me, paying attention to this is such an incredible, those are hints. Those are hints to see what is it that we are rejecting in ourselves, the parts that we so want to judge in others but refuse or never actually allowed ourselves to see in ourselves. you know
Mm.
it's such an opportunity to do that. And all the ways we get defensive, all the ways we get judgmental, like, to me, this is such a all those moments are such gateways to our own shame. To me, the shame and judgment, they are just so completely entangled, whether this is self-judgment or the judgmentalism of other people. And the one thing that I definitely saw in my journey was how much the separate self feeds of the need to be special and righteous and noble and different from the very people we criticize.
And let me say something there, because I think that's an excellent point that you're making. And I wonder whether the need to be special, which is partly a universal
Mm-hmm.
need, but it has extra intensity when we've experienced emotional neglect and developmental deprivation. Because when that need is not originally met, the need to be special has more gravitas, it has more emphasis as we step into our adulthoods. And I think that's a big driver of why we cling so strongly to our opinions, because it makes us feel important. And maybe that's connected to an earlier developmental issue around never feeling important. So I think if we don't feel important growing up, if we don't feel that secure attachment
Mm-hmm.
and that sense of feeling special, I think we're more susceptible to holding onto our opinions really tightly, because it gives us a temporary feeling of being important.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we don't know that there's a paradox here. The more we can actually embrace our lack of importance, in fact, we have a much more robust self-esteem and more self-compassion. And I think most people get their self-esteem by identifying with their thoughts and their opinions and holding on to them really tightly.
I would say that you're absolutely spot on that. And I would also say that it runs so deep that
Mm,
actually I got to see the need to be special as absolutely existential. To me, this was one of the most shocking realizations of this process, that this was how deep it wasn't just like it wasn't about just feeling nice by feeling special. What a lovely feeling. It was very much about that and the need for validation and praise and being noticed. But actually it ran, I saw this sense of specialness as being at the very core of the separate self.
right.
Because when I asked myself, if I'm not special, then what am I?
Then I'm no one.
Then I'm nobody. And that was
Mm,
what I would have called the experience of like a death before dying. It was like right going
yeah.
into the dark
An
void
ego death. Yeah.
through really seeing this, you know? So
Yeah.
this is why I'm saying that this is why I have so much compassion, and I completely, when I talk about the need to be special, I never talk about it as something wrong or something we should
Yeah.
also
It's
be
no shame
ashamed
about
of,
that.
right?
No.
It's so important because I could see that this sense of needing to be special is almost like I'm seen, I'm special, therefore I exist, which is why the ego death process, quote unquote, or the dismantling of the self structure is such a painful process, and the very reason why it feels like
Because
death.
we don't feel special. We feel empty.
Right.
We feel like we're nobody.
Right.
Yeah.
That's how deep it runs, because it's quite literally existential, which is why during the dismantling process of the self, and all those dark nights and everything, we start experiencing this existential fear, because the thought of not
Mm,
being special, the thought of not being seen, the thought of not being loved, it's
terrifying.
like it's terror, it's pure terror. The more you get down to this, because there's levels of that,
Yeah.
and so this is why this stuff is so worth exploring and looking at. And yeah, we ran out of time. So I, no, I hope this is going to be helpful, at least to some people, I hope. And thank you so much for your time and for sharing your knowledge and also your experience, because I think it brings it more home when we actually share our actual experiences with our humanness, you know?
Totally. I'm noticing I feel very connected to you from this conversation. And I think it's because we've just shared a lot of uh, humanness, right? We've just
Yeah.
shared all the parts of us that
Mm.
are vulnerable and limited and fallible, and including the desire to be special.
Oh, yeah.
And I think when I can be open around just my very ordinary fallible self, I it always helps me feel connected to people, and I feel like you've shared your fallibility with me, and so it's a very connecting conversation. So I really appreciate it.
And as you know, I could go on that subject, which we
So which
won't.
subject is that one?
The fallibility, especially my own fallibility,
Right.
and all my bullshit and all my all sorts of things. And I always say that if awakening does anything in terms of the really good byproducts of the awakening process, is really, it's not that all this stuff is wiped out all of the sudden. What changes really is just the ability to really be really okay with that. And when you're really okay with that, then you will be able
That's the
to
mm,
look at it properly, and also, which is why discovering how important is the honesty with ourselves and first and foremost is so important, and how it ties to the willingness to be vulnerable as well, which I had discovered was very difficult thing for me to do. But well, it used to, I can say it used to, but
It
yeah,
turns out that it's actually quite liberating to be
totally.
comfortable with being vulnerable.
Yeah,
But that's the paradox, isn't it?
right.
When we feel really comfortable to be fallible, there's a freedom that comes from that
Totally.
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that maybe at some point we'll come back to talking a little bit more about how to work with shame because we never even got to that point. And we also wanted to talk a little bit about anger because that's another topic that was mentioned, but that's for another time. Thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Maggie.